Welcome to another Wichita Toy Train Club Lionel product review. I'm Zachariah, and behind the camera we have Chris, and today we will be reviewing the Lionel LionChief Plus Rio Grande number 1208. A little bit of history about the Mikado. It was originally used in Japan starting in 1897 using the wheel arrangement of the 282 type steam locomotive. And if you're not familiar with the 282 configuration, that is meaning there are two wheels up here on the pilot truck, or the first set of wheels. There are 8 drive wheels right here in the middle with all the side rods, and 2 wheels on the trailing truck underneath the firebox. The locomotive was nicknamed the Mikado, meaning emperor in Japanese, and gained popularity in the United States starting around World War I. So now a small overview of the Lionel rendition of the Mikado. This is the LionChief Plus version, which means it has a couple of extra features than your usual LionChief that comes in your starter sets. It is still LionChief, so it is still a semi-scale locomotive. It's not full scale like your legacy engines. It does come with its own LionChief Plus controller, just like your regular LionChief locomotives or starter sets. The engine can be ran AC or DC. So with your DC wall supply, that would come with a new starter set or with a normal AC transformer. Not to confuse with anyone, it basically, if it says Lionel on it, you can run this engine with it, transformer wise. The locomotive can be ran either with the remote or with a regular transformer. There's a switch to be able to control it to regular conventional operation. Alright, so now looking at the front of the locomotive, up here we have just a simple pilot with just a very small plow, a very unrealistic looking front coupler. If this was a legacy engine, we would have a scale front coupler, and we would be able to interchange that with a dummy O-gauge coupler. Granted, you cannot double head this locomotive, obviously, because of the coupler, and the LionChief Plus system just doesn't let you do that. But anyway, moving up, we have a smooth deck up here, no safety tread or anything like that. A separately applied metal handrail, and again another metal handrail headed all the way back to the cab, and a couple of small steps. Our headlight is illuminated with illuminated number boards on each side. All the details on the front of the smoke box are cast in, and the shims up here for the marker lights do not illuminate, so they are just there. And there are 2 separately applied legible builder's plates on the side of the smoke box. Alright, now looking on the top of the locomotive, up front we have our smokestack, and right underneath of it we have a fan-driven smoke unit, which is synchronized with our sound system. The smoke unit does stay off when the locomotive is stopped, and as soon as we start moving it does turn on. That way we don't burn anything out, and there is no stationary smoke like there would be with a legacy locomotive. And as usual, to load smoke fluid into the smoke unit, just pour it directly down this here stack. Moving back, we have our sand dome, which is just cast in with a couple details cast into the boiler there. Moving further back, we have our plastic bell. There is no detail on the inside of the bell, but it is free swinging, just meaning we can push it and swing it. Back here we have our steam dome, and on the fireman's side we have a separately applied whistle. And further back behind that we have our hand-painted pop-off valves. Okay, now we've moved back above the cab. Right up front here we have our dynamo separately applied, along with some more separately applied details. And then on top of the cab we have a bunch of cast-in rivets, along with cast-in cab vents. And being cast in, these do not open or close, unlike the legacy counterpart that would have separately applied vents in which you would be able to open and close those vents. Okay, now starting on the bottom side of the locomotive, we can see that up here again we have our pilot truck, just 2 wheels. Right here we have our big steam chest with the cylinder and the valve. And we have this great looking running gear, all nice and silver and shiny, on our black drivers, which all have a silver ring around them. Looks very nice with the spokes, again, also in the drivers. Moving up, though, we have a bunch of cast-in details. All of these look beautiful, even though it is cast in. If you were just looking at it from afar, you could believe these were all separately applied and looks really nice. Moving up, our walkway, again, is another smooth walkway. There is no safety tread or anything like that. But along with that, this locomotive has a phenomenal paint job. The matte black, it looks wonderful, and the silver accents that very nicely. Also down here on the trailing truck, we have a little bit of molded in detail. It's not a whole lot, but again, it looks really nice for this locomotive. And same thing from up here and behind the drivers. There's not a whole lot back there. There's a couple leaf springs back there. But there again, there isn't a whole lot like you might see on a legacy locomotive. Now looking on the side of the cab of the locomotive, we can see right up front we have our hand-painted engineer figure, and on the other side we have a hand-painted fireman figure. Right in front of him we have a plastic window insert, which looks very nice. We have a whole bunch of rivets around the cab, and a nice crisp 1208, along with a legible DNRW GW, which is the Denver and Rio Grande Western, which is the full name of the Rio Grande. Again, the Lionel has done a wonderful job with the paint job around the cab. Okay, now looking on the inside of the cab of the locomotive, we can first see that our firebox has a flicker. Kind of hard to see with our light shining in there, but it does have a flicker effect, so we can see that there's a fire burning. Right up front here, we have that switch to flip between the transformer and the remote. On the fireman's side, we have a switch to turn our smoke on and off. And on the engineer's side, we have a switch to turn our chuff on and off. Again, with the detail on the inside, it's not the best, but for what's in there, it looks really nice. None of it's separately applied, but being all molded in, it does look very nice. Okay, now we have you right in between the engine and tender. Look at this tether, and we're showing you this because it is amazing the engineering Lionel put into this. So this tether is an electrical connection between the engine and tender, so the tender knows everything the locomotive is doing. They've made it really simple, so all you got to do to unhook this, for example, first is simply push this down, and I mean that's all you got to do. There's an electrical connection, a couple pins right up in here and on that tether, and it works amazing. So to connect it, all we have to do is push this forward, hold that up, and get it aligned properly, and push that in. And we have made a linkage between the engine and tender along with our electrical connections. We've had 0 issues with this tether, and I've never heard of really any issues. It's a strong tether mechanically with putting cars behind the locomotive, and it works very good electrically. Okay, now moving to the tender, right up front here where we have a whole bunch of molded in details. Doesn't look bad considering you really don't see this, seeing it's right there in between the engine and tender, but nonetheless we have a couple doors and just a little stuff here and there. Right down here though, it's kind of odd. We have just a gaping hole we can see onto the inside of the shell. Kind of weird, makes me think this might be some old tooling from K-Line, but just kind of a odd note there. It is, again, in between the engine and tender. You really don't see it, but again, kind of an odd note. And right here is, again, our tender side of the LionChief tether. Now we've moved to the side of the tender, and we can see there's a whole bunch of rivets, molded in rivets into the side of the tender. And right here we have our nice crisp Rio Grande. Down here in our trucks, they're not the most detailed in the world, but they are still very nice die-cast metal trucks. And on this front side here, we have a small cast-in step. Again, same thing, there's a small step on the back of the tender. Now we've moved to the top of the tender. Right up front here, we have our coal load. This is a metal coal load, so it's not real coal, but it's still a very nice looking coal load. On the top of the back end of the tender, it is all smooth. There's a couple cast-in rivets, And then we have our water hatches back here. These don't open like a legacy locomotive would. They are all cast in, so it doesn't open. There's kind of a weird hole back here. Not sure what's with that, but it still doesn't look bad on the back here. There's a couple rivets around it. And that's about it on top of the tender. Now move to the back of the tender. We have a cast-in metal ladder right here. Some more cast-in details around here. Our nice crisp 1208. And some lettering back down here above the coupler. This here coupler is a electric coupler, so that can be fired by our LionChief Plus remote. Okay, so now we've flipped the locomotive upside down, and that way we can see the underside of it. Again, up front here are our pilot truck. We have our drivers. Again, we can see our first two are flanged. These two middle drivers are blind wheels. That way we can negotiate tighter curves. And back here we have again flanged drivers with traction tires. That way we have a little bit more pulling power. And again back here we have our trailing truck, again with the one axle. One thing to note, especially if you just took this locomotive out of the box, Lionel cannot lubricate these locomotives from the factory, otherwise they'd be coated in oil by the time you get them. So it is always a good idea to lubricate your locomotive when you get it out of the box. And Lionel recommends every 4 hours of runtime. So where you want to go is right here, where the axle goes through the frame. There's a little brass bushing down in there. That's where you want to be getting. So you go all the way down this side and down this side. It's also a good idea to put a little dab on these center rail pickup rollers. And also on our side rods. This will help make sure the locomotive has a good long running life and kind of helps to keep away from the squeaking. Kind of the same thing back here on our plastic bushings on our trailing truck, and again where our axle goes through our metal up here on our pilot truck. Okay, now we've moved to the underside of the tender. And again, we can see it's very plain down here. We have our electrocoupler down here on the end, and our LionChief tether up here, and our two trucks on the underneath of the tender. And just as the same with the locomotive, we need to oil right where those axles go into plastic bushings on the edge of the side frames. It's always good precaution, helps keep it from making squeaking noises. Those can be infuriating sometimes. Another small note with that LionChief tether is it provides all power to the tender. As you can see, there are no center rail pickup rollers, so it has to get its center rail power from the locomotive. Alright, now we're ready to start this engine up. As you can already hear, the engine's chirping, looking for the signal from the LionChief remote. So we'll go ahead and power that on. And you can see as soon as I power that on, our sounds come on and we have full control of the locomotive. So over here on the right hand side we have our whistle. And a quick double tap of the whistle will throw our rear electric coupler. We have some different announcements.
Trying to hold our schedule. Can I move? Over. Negative. Stand by for track orders.
And then we have our bell. And if this was a diesel LionChief Plus, we could double tap that and get our front coupler thrown. A quick note, to turn down the volume, if you press and hold the whistle and bell for 3 seconds, we go into this version and you can adjust the volume. Okay, a couple other quick notes before we go ahead and pull out. Our front headlight is LED, so it's nice and bright. There is no Rule 17 lighting going on, so that is a constant brightness. It doesn't dim when we stop or lighten up as we start moving. We have our fan-driven smoke unit. Again, that stays in sync with our chuffs from the sound system. There is no backup light on the locomotive, so when we go into reverse, there's no backup light. If you remember from the back of the tender, we did forget to mention that. And there's also no light in the cab. Okay, now that we've gone through everything on this locomotive, let's take it for a quick spin around the layout.
Dispatcher, I got a pull to make schedule. Over. Okay, 8 degrees. Out. We're on the move. Train is outbound. Dispatcher here. You have the track. Over. We're on the move. Train is outbound. Over. Copy that. Dispatcher here. You have a clear track. Over. Copy. That'll keep us on schedule. Out. We're trying to hold our schedule. Can I move? Over. Negative. Stand by for track orders.
Okay, so now that we've taken the locomotive for a spin around the layout, you could hear that rattling noise as the engine went down the track. And what that is the tender's bottom plate seems to vibrate inside the body, the shell, and we're not really sure why that is. Everything's nice and tight. We tried turning down the volume. The speaker just seems to rattle and seems to make that really unpleasant sound. I don't know if that's a common problem with the Mikados. Most of the ones I've seen have been really good, sound really nice. Same thing with the Hudsons. This might be an isolated incident, but that is something to keep in mind. Sometimes these things aren't perfect. This locomotive was cataloged in Lionel's 2016 Volume 2 catalog, along with a number of other LionChief Plus Mikados. This and all of them all retailed for $430, manufacturer suggested retail price. But if you go through a decent Lionel authorized dealer, you can probably get a decent discount on that retail price. This concludes our review of the Lionel LionChief Plus Mikado number 1208. Be sure to like us on Facebook so you get all the notifications on new product reviews and our open hours here in Wichita, Kansas. And subscribe to us on YouTube, again, for more product review notifications. Thanks for watching.